Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very second Build Your Brand webinar of the year. My name is Jess Larkin, and I am the Marketing and Communications Specialist at Cornerstone. Today, we're diving into accessibility in marketing, which is a totally new topic for the series and something that I think we should all focus more on in 2022. But before we get started, we of course have a little bit of housekeeping as per usual. My contact information is right there on the screen if you'd like to get in contact with me. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We post industry and Cornerstone updates and information. Visit Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube to give us a follow. Now let's get into the webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to give a quick anecdote about my experience with inaccessibility. When I was in college, I led a volunteer trip sponsored by our university to Nashville, Tennessee, where we were tasked with helping build ramps for those with physical disabilities. The builds were completely free and were offered to low-income individuals who otherwise would not have been able to afford this option. Especially for those who were able to live independently, these ramps were life-changing. After this experience, my friends and I, who were on the trip together, often pointed out the accessibility issues on our campus, how there weren't enough options for students to get around quickly if the normal routes weren't an option. We found ourselves very aware of the issue on our own home turf. Fast forward a couple years, and I had an even more intimate experience with a loved one who had both visual and physical disabilities and had difficulty navigating daily life. And since then, it's become abundantly clear to me that there is room to be more inclusive, especially in our marketing and especially in our industry. As technology becomes more advanced and clients become more empowered, it's more important than ever to expand our communication scope to be inclusive. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 25.7% of U.S. adults, more than 1 in 4 people, have some form of disability. These conditions include impairments or difficulties with vision, hearing, cognition, mobility, independent living, and self-care. So what is accessibility in the context of marketing, and why does it matter that we put a focus on creating a more inclusive brand? Accessible marketing means designing an experience to meet users of all abilities. According to the World Health Organization, a disability is a mismatch between the needs of an individual and a product, service, or social structure. In other words, the demands of the environment do not align with the abilities of the individual. Therefore, it becomes an accessibility problem. In a practical environment like a school, for instance, ramps and elevators should be available for wheelchair users. Audiobooks or braille versions of textbooks should be available for those with a visual impairment. Translated into marketing, this means creating content and experiences that everyone can access. From Think with Google, to better serve our audiences, we must consider a wider range of perspectives and intersectional experiences from the start. And being conscious of accessibility is more than a humanitarian play. Being more inclusive improves customer retention and service. It enhances your search engine optimization and extends your ads' reach and relevance. In addition, non-compliance with accessibility standards may result in legal trouble, as the laws on ADA accessibility in marketing have become much more stringent over the years. So how can we take this idea of accessibility and put it into practice? Before making any changes, it's important to recognize that there is more than one client persona to consider when creating a viable marketing strategy. You want to make sure that the materials you put together are beneficial to a wide range of targets, not just the ideal client profile that you may be chasing now. Create a number of client profiles with varying abilities, demographic data, personas, industries, and so on that you can use to relate to your services. For example, a well-rounded client profile might be Janice, age 41, mother of 4, married, self-employed, high-income earner, college graduate, hearing impaired. If you're interested in hearing more about customer profiling, let me know in the survey in the description box below, or send me an email at jlarkin@crnstone.com, and we might get it into the schedule for 2022. Now that we have our client profiles in mind, we begin to consider our content in relation to that audience. According to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, content should be perceivable, so that all of the site's components and information are presented to users in a way that they can perceive. Content is operable, so users must be able to operate the content's interface. Understandable, users should be able to understand the content in the interface. And robust, users must be able to access the content with different technologies. So let's put some of these ideas into practice and consider a truly user-friendly website that is accessible for all users of all abilities. The first consideration when designing your website for a quality user experience for all client personas is the actual architecture of your content. Just as you would write a paper in school, you want to make sure that the content you're using on your site makes sense. There should be a clear focus for each page of the site. As you create your site, consider creating a basic outline of each page of the site and creating bullet points on what you plan to include on that page. Then, with a bird's eye view, you can review the content to make sure it makes contextual sense for those with learning, cognitive, or mental health disabilities. The Apple website on the right there is a great example of a website that is well designed with content architecture in mind. Their products are very clearly labeled at the top of the page, with each page on the site dedicated to a specific product. Now let's talk about the fonts on your website. The headings of your content on your website pages matters more than you might think. Headers 1 and headers 2 tags, just like you see on the screen to the right, are not only useful when optimizing your website for Google searches, but they're also useful for helping screen readers, which help those with visual impairments decipher content. So you can see a look back on Tom Brady's prolific football career, which I thought was very apt for right now. That would be considered an H1 tag on the back end of this website. Additionally, the types of fonts that you use on your site are very important. You want to make sure that the font is bold enough and large enough for all users of all types to read. The font on the left, for example, is much more readable than the font on the right. The font on the right is bold, sure, but it's also in a very complicated font that a lot of people would have difficult time deciphering. Next, you want to consider the images that you're using. The images should be easy to decipher both visually and cognitively. If you have an image on your website, be sure to include alt text with the image. Alt text is a piece of text that describes what's going on in the image. Many users with visual impairments will use a screen reader or braille readers when viewing websites, and adding alt text to your image enables them to register the image properly, just like anybody else would. An option to add alt text to your images is available on most website platforms like Squarespace, WordPress, as well as many social media sites like Facebook. If you're working with a web designer on your site, you can request that alt text be added to each image. In addition to imagery, you have to be considerate about the use of your colors on your website. There should be a very high contrast between the foreground of the site and the background. For example, yellow font on a white background, as you can see on the left there, has far less contrast to yellow font on a black background, much easier to read on the right than it is on the left. And when in doubt, black on a white background is always a great option. Finally, if you have any videos on your site, be sure to include both high-quality audio and closed captions to serve both visual and hearing impaired audiences. The video that I'm showing on the screen is from a content creator named Thomas Frank, who uses high-quality audio, visuals, and closed captioning that are great examples for creating accessible content. While we exclusively reviewed website accessibility, these considerations are applicable to most marketing. Social media, flyers, forms, etc. Flyer design should be very careful with colors and with fonts. Social media images should include alt text. Forms should be created with content architecture in mind. As I mentioned before, be sure to take that client profile of the person with a disability and apply it to your content, just like you would with your ideal client profile. If it doesn't work for a client with a disability, then it doesn't work, period, because you're cutting off a large swath of potential clients. These are just some basic steps that you should consider when dipping your toe into marketing accessibility. Of course, there's so much more that you can do, but starting with these very simple alterations to any of your existing marketing is a great first step. So let's take a look at some brands that have done well with introducing accessibility to their marketing. First, we have Cole Snyder, who is a social media influencer and a C5, C6 quadriplegic, who uses his platform as an example of what accessibility in marketing looks like. In each of his Instagram posts, he includes an image description at the bottom of the caption to paint a picture of what is happening in the photograph for anyone who might be using social media with a visual impairment. He also includes edited closed captions in his YouTube videos for those with hearing impairments to enjoy their content more. Another example of accessible marketing is the website for the National Health Service in the UK, which has clear headings and fonts and simple navigation throughout the site. The website was built with the user experience in mind, which meant reducing the amount of time for the average user to find the information that they're looking for. This clear and simple database makes it a great example of an accessible website. Finally, the podcast This American Life has upped its accessibility game by providing transcripts for those with hearing impairments to review if they can't enjoy the show itself on its intended platform. As representatives in the healthcare industry, it's important that we lead the charge in creating content that is accessible for all audiences. Tiny changes will make a big difference to clients who, already burdened and stressed with the idea of even finding health insurance, may have too much friction involved in finding a plan that works for them. As you can tell, I love talking accessibility. So if you want to learn more about accessibility in marketing and take your content to the next level, please let me know and I will put a accessibility 201 webinar together to kind of go the next step. These are kind of the starting steps for you to get your brand and make it a little bit more accessible, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Thank you all and have a great day.